Welcome to Monobiology. In this lesson, we're going to learn about the hormones associated with pregnancy and childbirth. Shortly after a woman becomes pregnant, a hormone called prolactin is released by the anterior pituitary. Prolactin has an effect on the mammary glands, more specifically the milk ducts within the mammary glands, and causes them to start to get ready to produce milk. Over the course of the pregnancy, prolactin is continually released, and by the time the woman gives birth to a baby, she is ready to feed the baby via her breasts. During childbirth, there is a series of positive feedback mechanisms that work to help ensure that the baby is able to be pushed out of the female. The hormone most responsible for this is oxytocin. Now, as you can see in this mechanism here, the head of the baby begins to, it's a cycle, but we can assume that as the baby grows and grows, the head of the baby begins to push against the cervix, assuming the baby's in the right position, which doesn't always happen, but in this case we'll assume that it is. So the head of the baby pushes against the cervix. Nerve impulses from the cervix are transmitted to the brain. So there's nerve endings in this area, and essentially those nerve endings go back up to the brain. The brain stimulates the pituitary gland to release the hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is carried by the bloodstream to the uterus and causes uterine contractions. And those uterine contractions are what pushes the baby towards the cervix and eventually out of the cervix and through the birth canal. Now, obviously I'm not a woman and I've never actually experienced it, but to give you some small indication of what the process is like in terms of what it feels like, and again, this is not a real indication, it's only a small indication. Imagine having a foot cramp. I know that sounds kind of strange, but imagine having a foot cramp. Your muscles are contracting and you can't untighten them. Magnify that probably a ridiculous 1,000 times, and that's kind of what, in your middle area, in your belly and a little bit lower, what a contraction would feel like. Again, that's not what it feels like exactly, but your muscles are contracting without your pushing them to do so, and it would be very intense muscle contractions that you wouldn't be able to control. And that is what oxytocin does inside a woman's body. Now, if a woman is supposed to be giving birth and her oxytocin levels are not high enough, then doctors will actually inject oxytocin into the woman's bloodstream to help the process along. Now, one of the things that you notice in this picture here are the tendons right here that are associated with the pelvis. And interestingly, there's another hormone that is released during childbirth that helps with those. Okay, so this is a front view of the woman's pelvis. So here's the vagina. This is where the head of the baby would come out. And these tendons here, all along here, are meant to keep the baby inside during pregnancy, but during childbirth, that can be a problem. So relaxin is a hormone that's actually released by the placenta during childbirth. And what it does is it loosens up these tendons here a little bit, allowing a little bit of extra flexibility so that the baby's head can come through. Once the baby's head is through, it's a lot easier for the baby to come through. The head's the hardest part to get through. But once the head is through, then they can be pulled out. And the relaxin hormone, which is again released by the placenta, makes that, never going to say easy in this, but makes it slightly easier for that to happen. One other thing that makes it slightly easier, you've heard of a woman's water breaking. Water breaking simply means that the amniotic sac has ruptured and the amniotic fluid has basically gone through the birth canal. Now, why would that be of benefit? Well, think about it. the baby has to go through the birth canal in order to get outside. The amniotic fluid acts as a lubricant that allows the baby to move much more easily through the birth canal. Again, I say easier is a relative term. When you're actually giving birth, actually in labor, it's probably not going to feel easy, but it's designed to make it easier. It would be that much harder without that. And those are the hormones that are associated with pregnancy. I mean, we talked about some other ones too. The main one we haven't talked about was prolactin, oxytocin, relaxin. Now, one other quick thing we're going to talk about is what happens after the baby is born. It's kind of an interesting mechanism. Let's talk about it. All right, so once the baby's born, we have women may choose to breastfeed, they may not, but there's one example here of why it might not be a bad idea to breastfeed. So what we have is we have the baby will suckle on the breast, and there will be a nerve impulse that goes back to the anterior pituitary. Okay, so the suckling, the actual physical motion of suckling on the breast causes a message to be sent from the nervous system to the brain. The brain then tells the pituitary to send two things back: oxytocin and prolactin. Okay, so the very act of suckling causes both of those hormones to be released by the pituitary. Now, why oxytocin? Oxytocin actually causes slight contractions in the milk ducts, which push the milk out and help the baby get the nourishment that it needs. Prolactin, of course, we know already, stimulates the milk ducts to produce milk. So not only is the baby going to get help getting the milk by the oxytocin causing the milk ducts to contract, but it's also going to ensure that its next meal is available by prolactin stimulating the milk ducts to produce more milk. Now, one other interesting point about this. The act of suckling produces oxytocin. We know that oxytocin causes uterine contractions as well. Well, in the past, women had to wait a few days before the placenta and the leftover bits of the amniotic sac and things would come out. And so as women breastfed, oxytocin would cause those uterine contractions, which would eventually push out the placenta and the remnants of the amniotic sac. However, these days, when a woman gives birth, the obstetric and gynecologist doctors, they actually go in and they remove the placenta and the remnants of the amniotic sac so that women don't have to wait a few days afterwards. Okay, another couple of things I want to talk about with respect to breastfeeding. So we have, during the first few days after the baby's born, we have a special type of milk, this one here, called colostrum. And this is an actual picture of colostrum, human colostrum, within 4 days after the baby's born. And then milk eventually, a couple days later, turns into more like what we would think it would look like. But this milk here, this colostrum, is loaded with antibodies. Antibodies pass all through pregnancy from mother to baby through the placenta. But after childbirth, there's another mechanism, this right here, where mothers can continue to protect their babies from any diseases that the mothers have already fought off for the first few months of the baby's development. And colostrum goes a long way to doing that. And of course, there's lesser amounts of antibodies in regular breast milk. Another good reason why women should consider at least breastfeeding their young. It's a personal choice, of course, but there are antibodies that allow babies to be protected for their first few months of life. Now, after that, the babies develop their own immune system, and the antibodies have no effect on the baby anymore because the baby's own immune system will fight off those antibodies. But for the first little while, the mother can provide a good source of protection to the baby by breastfeeding. That in a nutshell is the pregnancy and childbirth hormone lecture. If you have any questions, make sure you bring them to class. Here are my references for this video.